What's up everyone? Welcome back. I'm Nick, and this is the perfect video to follow the last video. So if you did not watch my last video on state objects and observed objects, definitely watch that one first and then come on back to this one. Because in this video, we're gonna look at the environment object. And it essentially is the same thing as a state or an observed object, except this one we can actually put into the environment. And all that means is we can add it to the background on our app or on our view hierarchy, and then all of the views in that hierarchy will have access to this object. So this is perfect if we have some sort of class or object that we want to use in a whole bunch of different screens, and we don't actually want to pass in that object from screen to screen to screen to screen. Instead, we could just put it in the background, put it in the environment, and then each screen can individually reference this object. So it's perfect. This is the power of SwiftUI, and I hope you guys enjoy it. All right, welcome back everyone. I'm of course in Xcode again. Let's right click the navigator. Let's create a new file. It will be a SwiftUI view, of course. And we're gonna call this one environment object bootcamp. Go ahead and click create. Once you're inside, click resume on the canvas. Should be used to this by now, and let's get ready to get coding. Now there is some setup we have to do for this video, and if you did not watch my last video where we learned about state objects and observed objects, I would recommend watching that one first and then coming back to this one, because this is kind of the more advanced version of that. So first you should learn observed object if you do not. Then you should learn state object, which is kind of the same thing as observed object. And now we're going to look at environment object. And environment object is basically the same thing as a state object, except we can put it into the environment. And by putting it into the environment, we don't have to actually pass this object around our app. Instead, all of the views in our app in this hierarchy will automatically have access to this object because it is in that background environment. So let's get started here. Let's create a very simple app. Let's create a navigation view. Open the brackets. Inside we're going to add a list, open the brackets again, and then we want some data for this list. So let's create a view model class to host our data. So let's create a class. I'm going to call it environment view model, and let's make it conform to observable object. Open the brackets. And we're conforming to observable object so that we can, when we implement it in our view, we can tell the view to actually observe this object. I covered this in the last video where we covered observed and state objects, so this should not be new to you. And in this environment view model, let's create some data. So let's do @published var data array of type. And let's just do an array of string for now. Let's set it equal to a blank array. And then let's create an init function. So when this view model actually gets created, it's going to call this init function. And when we init, we want to fill up our data array with some values. So let's create a function to fetch and store values into this data array. So we'll do func get data, open and close parentheses, open the brackets. And of course we don't have a database or anything, so we're just going to append some fake data to this data array. Let's just do self.dataArray.append, and we need a new element here of a string. So the data we're appending here doesn't really matter because that's not what we're talking about. So let's just append some maybe iOS devices. We'll do iPhone, and then let's self.dataArray.append. We'll do iPad. And there's actually an easier way to do an append with a bunch of content. So let's do self.dataArray.append, and this time let's use the content of. And this wants a sequence, which we can do by using an array. So let's just create an array. And then here I'll just append iPhone, comma, we'll do iPad, comma, let's do iMac, and maybe Apple Watch. Let's get rid of these first two appends here. And all that really matters here is that we are going to append these 4 items to our data array. So when we init, let's call getData, and that should be it for this actual class. Now I want to note here that in your real app, this is not going to be called environment view model. This word environment will probably be based on the screen. So if you had like a home screen, this would be like home screen view model. It's a better way of naming it. And then in this, you would have all of your functions to fetch data, store data, save data, go to your database, and that all that logic would be in this class. But we're not covering that right now, so all you need to know is that all of our data is within this class object. So let's reference this object in our view now. So down here where we have the environment object Bootcamp view, this is the view that's on our preview on the right side here. So let's create an @state object var. Let's call it view model, and it will be of type environment view model, and we'll set it equal to a new environment view model, open and close parentheses. Now in this line, we are creating a new environment view model. We are initializing it right here with this open and close parentheses. So as soon as we initialize it, this init is going to get called. It's going to call get data. It's going to append the data to our data array. And now we can access that data through this view model. And so in this list here, let's do for each, open the parentheses. Let's use this third completion here with the ID. We're using the ID here because we don't have IDs for all of these items because these are just strings. In the last video, we used a custom data type that conformed to identifiable. So because they had IDs already, we used the other for each completion. But since these don't have IDs, we're going to create IDs in this loop here. So let's just do the data is going to be view model dot data array. Again, that's referencing this view model and then the data inside. The ID will be \self. This is just creating an ID basically for each of these items in the data. And then for the content, let's hit enter. Let's get rid of this ugliness, and we are looping on each, let's just call it item for now. So in this list, let's just add a text with the item. Click resume on the canvas just to make sure we are all set up here. All right, iPhone, we have our data on the screen. Let's, underneath this list, add a navigation title. Let's call this iOS devices. Now, when I click on one of these devices, I want to go to the next screen, maybe a sub-screen for that device. So instead of just having a regular text here, let's make each of these a navigation link. And I did a whole video on a navigation view and navigation link, so this also should not be new to you. We'll add navigation link here, open the parentheses, and we're going to go down to the destination and label completion. So the destination is the next screen, and right now we'll just leave that as text destination. And then the label is what we want it to look like on this screen. So I'm going to cut this text with the item and just paste that in the label for now. So immediately on our preview, we can see that it did update. We have these nice little indicator icons on the right side. If we press play on the live preview, when we click this word iPhone, it's going to bring us to the next screen. Right now, that next screen is just a destination. So let's create a custom second screen here. And I'm going to do that underneath this view. We're going to create another view. Let's create a struct. Let's call this maybe detail view. This will be of type view, and let's open the brackets. Now we know every view needs a body, so let's open the brackets again. And in this body, what do we want that second screen to look like? Let's give it a Z stack, open the brackets. Let's give it a background layer, so I'll make a comment here, background. And let's give the background maybe color dot orange dot ignores safe area, just to give it a background color. And on top of that, let's add some text. And I want that text to be the item that we clicked on. So when we create this detail view, let's add an init. Let's add a variable that will be in our init so it determines what we clicked on. So let's say let selected item, and it'll be of type string. So when we create a detail view, it will ask us for a selected item. And let's just put that on the foreground layer. And we're going to do just maybe text with selected item. Let's give it a font of headline. Let's give it a maybe foreground color of orange. Let's give it some padding. Let's give it some extra horizontal padding. So we'll do padding dot horizontal. Let's give it a background color of color dot white and a corner radius of 30. Just to see what this looks like quick, let's put it into our preview down here. So I'm going to comment out the environment object bootcamp and just put in our detail view. See what it looks like. Click resume on the canvas. Oh, I forgot that when we create our detail view, we need to tell it a selected item. So let's just add iPhone. Click resume on the canvas. Let's see what it looks like. I think it'll look good. That looks good. That's all we wanted on this screen. Obviously, in your real app, you're going to have more information than this. But this looks good. So let's incorporate this into our app so far. Let's put the environment object bootcamp back. Comment out the detail view. I'm going to scroll up to where we have our destination right now. Right now it's just a screen that says destination, but we're going to change it to a detail view. Open the parentheses, and in our init we need to have a selected item. Of course, that is going to be our item. Let's click resume on the canvas, click on iPad. We have our selected item. It says iPad very nicely. And now one more step for this video. I know this is a lot of setup, but this is good practice. When we click on this iPad, I want to go to a third screen. So let's create another view here so that when we click on this iPad, we can go to a third screen in this hierarchy. So underneath the detail view, I'm going to add another view. And this is why I'm doing this video towards the end of this course, because it is a little more complicated, but you're going to see why this is so cool. So let's create a struct. This will be a final view, let's just call it. This will be of type view, open the brackets. And what does every view need? It needs a body. Open the brackets again. So in this final view, let's add another Z stack. Open the brackets. Let's add a background layer. Let's give it a gradient, just because we haven't used that very often. So let's do a linear gradient. Open the parentheses and press enter on the gradient colors. I'm going to put these on different lines here. So we have gradient. We have our start point, we have our end point, and I'm going to go from the top left to the bottom right. So top leading to bottom trailing, and let's switch up these colors. So I'm going to delete this color red and just add color, open parentheses, and start typing color literal here. For the color literal, I'm going to use maybe this blue here. I don't know what exact color it is. And then for this one, I'm going to delete the color blue and type in color, open parentheses, color literal. And I'm going to find a darker version of this blue. So last time I used, I think this one. Let's just use this darker, slightly darker. So we have a nice shade from the top left to the bottom right. Let's take this final view and put it in our preview really quickly. So let's comment out the environment object bootcamp and just add a final view. Open and close the parentheses, and let's see what it looks like quick. Looks good, but I wanted to go to the full screen, so I forgot to add .ignores safe area. Full screen, and then on top of this, let's add a foreground layer. And on the foreground, we're just going to add a maybe a scroll view. Open the brackets. In the scroll view, we'll add a V stack with spacing of 20. Open the brackets again. And in here, let's just add text with item 1, text with item 2, item 2, and text with item 3. Let's, on this VStack, let's add .foreground color of white and font of large title maybe. These items are bigger. And when we're actually in this, we're going to be in a navigation view. So there should be a navigation bar at the top, but we're not going to worry about all that right now. This looks good to me. This is going to get our point across. So let's connect this to the rest of our app. Let's first put the environment object bootcamp back in our preview, comment out the final view. Let's go up to our detail view. And in our detail view, when we click on that selected item, I want to navigate to the final view. So we're going to do that again with a navigation link. So navigation link, open the parentheses. We're going to use the destination and label. And the destination, of course, is going to be final view, open and close parentheses. The label is going to be that button that we created earlier. Let's cut it. Let's paste it into the label. And let's check this out quick. Let's click resume on the canvas. We have our screen 1 here. I'm going to click on iMac. And we're on our second screen. That's this detail view. And we can see that we did click on iMac because that's what's coming up in this button. And when I click on this button, we should now go to our third view, which is our final view. So let's click on that final view. And here we have item 1, item 2, item 3. And of course, we can go back through that navigation hierarchy if we want. But the point of this video is to look at the environment object, which we have not used yet. And the reason I've set this up this way is because what if on this third view, we want to access this data array. So this iPhone, iPad, iMac, all of that view model. What if we wanted to access that not only on this first view, but also on this second view and also on this third view? Well, there's 2 ways that we can do it. And first, I'm going to show you guys the state object and observed object way. This is what we learned in the last video. So right now, at the top of our view here, I know we have a bunch of views. I hope this is not too confusing. But in our first view, we have a state object with the view model. Now, if we want to pass this view model to our second view, to our detail view, we could add in the detail view at observed object var view model, we'll call it, and it will be of type environment view model. So when we create a detail view, it will ask us to pass in this view model. So we're going to get that error back in our first view here. So it's saying, where is this view model? Let's fix it. And let's pass in an environment view model. So this view model, we're just going to pass it in when we go to our destination. So now our detail view has access to that view model. So detail view has access, but now what if we want to get it to our third view, to that final view? Well, in the final view, again, we could add at observed object var, and let's call it view model again, and it will be of type environment view model. So now, again, when we create a final view, it's going to ask us for a view model. So we're going to get that error on our second screen. When we create this final view, it's saying, hey, where's the view model? So let's pass in again a view model to our third screen. So now this final view has access to that same view model. And in our final view here, we now have a view model. So in our VStack, we can access the view model directly. So I'm going to delete these text items here. I'm going to add a for each, open the brackets. Let's use the ID and content. The data is going to be the view model dot data array. And that's the data array we made at the beginning of this video. ID, again, let's just do backslash dot self, and then for the content, we'll hit enter, get rid of this ugliness, I'll call it item, and we're just going to add text with the item. So let's click resume on the canvas, wrap up what we did so far. So on the first screen, I'm going to scroll up here and walk you through it. On the first screen, I'm sorry if this is getting repetitive. On the first screen, we initialize the view model with a state object. And we did the state object so that it does persist if the view has to re-render for whatever reason. So we have our view model. And then we go to the second screen when we click on iPad. And when we go to that detail view, we are passing the view model into the second detail view. So on the detail view, we created an observed object, and we are observing that view model. So we pass it in, and now we have access to this view model on the second screen. So although we're not using it on this second screen, we have access to it. So we could use it if we wanted to, but there's nothing on this screen that actually needs it. And then when we click on this iPad button, we're going to a third screen, to that final view. And again, we're going to pass this view model into that final view. So I'm going to click this. And now in our final view, we created another observed object that will observe that same view model that we passed through the hierarchy. And on this final view, we can now use that data in this view. So we have the iPhone, iPad, iMac. We have access to that data on this third view. So we didn't have to create a new view model. We didn't have to create a new environment view model. but instead we just pass the one that we created through the hierarchy to this third view. Now this is great and this is efficient, but there are cases in your app when you're going to have subviews on subviews, and it's going to be more than even just 3 views. You might have 5 or 10 views into your hierarchy. And when you have something like that, it might get really annoying and confusing and repetitive to have to create an observed object on every single screen and then pass in your view model from screen to screen to screen. Because, for example, this second detail view didn't even use the observed object. We passed it in so that we could get it to our third view, but we actually don't even need it in this whole view, right? Like, it's just here just to get it to the final view. It's not here because we actually need it on this screen. So this was kind of like extra code. So what we're gonna do is take this state object that we initialized here, and then we're gonna put it into the environment. So this way, once it's in the environment, all of the views in that hierarchy will have access to it. So we no longer would need to pass it directly into our app, but all the views would just have access to that environment. So we have our view model here, and then on this navigation view, I'm just going to add .environment object, and then the object is going to be our view model. So we're taking this view model that we're creating right here, and we're putting it in the environment. And now all of these subviews that derive from within here, so pretty much anything in our navigation view, whether it's 1 screen in, 10 screens in, 100 screens in, they're all going to have access to this view model. So because they already have access to this, we no longer need to pass it into our detail view. It will already have access to it. So I'm going to go down to our detail view, and we don't need to pass this in anymore. So I'm just going to delete it because we actually don't need it on the detail view at all. And then I'm going to move down to the final view where we have this again. And of course, we're not going to pass an observed object into this final view. Instead, we're just going to pull that object from the environment. So I'm going to use @environment object here. And the only thing to be aware here is that by adding this line, you need to know as the developer that there is an environment view model in the environment. Because if you add this and there is no environment view model in the actual environment, then you're going to get a crash. But we know, because we just added this, that we actually have this view model in the environment. So when we create a final view, we no longer need to pass in a view model directly. It's just going to pull this from the environment. So if I scroll up here, we no longer need this initializer for the final view, so I'll just delete that. And you'll notice here that the detail view doesn't even have a reference to the view model because we don't need it in that detail view. So there is no more observed object here. We're not passing it in here. And back up on our first view, we again don't need to pass in that view model to our detail view because we're just throwing it into the environment. So I'm going to delete view model from our init here. And you can see that even our inits are just getting cleaner now because we have this in the environment. We don't need to pass it from screen to screen. And let's click resume on the canvas and watch this magic. On our first screen, we are creating the state object, which is our environment view model here. We're throwing it into the environment. And then we're going to go to our second screen, which says iPhone. So when we click on this detail view, we go to that second screen, but we're not actually passing in the view model. We're just going to that second screen. And in the background of this detail view is that view model. But because this detail view did not actually need to use that view model, we didn't need that line of code. We didn't pass it in. And then we just go straight to our final view. So let's click on iPhone. And when we get to our final third view here, we just pull that view model from the environment by using an environment object. And we have access to that list, to that data, without having to pass it from screen to screen to screen. So this is the power of the environment object. Once it's in the environment, all of the views in the hierarchy will automatically have access to it. And it just makes our life as developers so easy because we no longer need to pass this from screen to screen to screen. We can just throw it into the background, and then now you have this nice environment object. And this is really cool and really important because if we update this view model from this third screen, if we add data, delete data, if we change data, it will also be updated on all of the other views that are using this same environment view model. So this is a very, very efficient way to pass data around our app without actually having to pass it from screen to screen to screen. So that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know this was a longer one, but before we go, I just do want to mention that the environment object should be used kind of sparingly. Like there should only be a couple objects going around the environment in your app. If you have a bunch of different view models, you probably don't want to add them all to your environment because it might slow down your app, but even more than that, it might get confusing to you as the developer and your teammates to have so many different models in your environment. So I would really just keep the environment object for items that really need to be used on a bunch of different screens, maybe throughout the hierarchy. So if you have a bunch of different screens and only a couple of them need access to this same view model, use the environment object. But if you have a case where only one or two screens need that view model, so if we are just creating this list and we only had one detail view, then I would keep it simple by using a state object and the observed object that we did in the last video. The environment object really comes into play and it really becomes handy when you have a larger view hierarchy. So thank you guys again for watching. Leave a comment if you enjoyed this video or if you're still confused, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. As always, thank you for watching. I'm Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.